There's a sequence, a pattern buried in history that's destroyed every superpower that's ever existed. And it's not random, it's not chaotic, it's mathematical, predictable. Almost like there's a script written in advance that every empire unknowingly follows step by step until the final collapse. In 1945, the British Empire controlled a quarter of the world's population. By 1960, it was gone. In 1985, the Soviet Union was a nuclear superpower locked in a global struggle with America. By 1991, it didn't exist. Rome lasted 1,000 years. Spain ruled the seas. All of them thought they were different. All of them thought the pattern didn't apply to them. They were wrong every single time. And right now, in 2025, the United States has just crossed into step 4 of the exact same sequence: the wealth inequality, the political dysfunction, the loss of faith in institutions. Every warning sign that preceded the fall of Britain, the Soviet Union, and Rome is present in America today. We're not heading toward the pattern, we're in it. And history says the final stages come fast. This is the story of how empires collapse, why they never see it coming, and why the math says America is next. Let's start with the most recent collapse: the British Empire in 1940. Picture this: Britain just won World War II. Churchill is on the world stage. The Union Jack flies over India, Egypt, Kenya, Malaysia, Hong Kong. One quarter of humanity lives under British rule. The Royal Navy dominates the seas. London is the financial capital of the world. This is power. This is empire. This looks permanent. But beneath the victory parades, the rot was total, and within 20 years, it would all be gone. Let's walk through the stages. Britain's rise was extraordinary. From a small island nation, it built the largest empire in human history. By the 1920s, it controlled 13 million square miles, every continent, every ocean. The Industrial Revolution started in Britain. Steam engines, factories, railroads. British coal powered the world. British ships carried half the world's trade. The pound sterling was the global reserve currency. This wasn't just military power, it was economic, cultural, technological dominance. The British believed they were bringing civilization to the world, that their empire was ordained by progress itself. They thought it would last forever, but inside Britain, the wealth was concentrated at the top. The aristocracy lived in country estates, multiple homes, servants, lavish parties, while workers in Manchester and Birmingham lived in slums. In the colonies, it was worse. British officials extracted wealth from India, Africa, the Caribbean, while local populations had nothing. Famines in India killed millions while grain was exported to Britain. The gap between the ruling class and everyone else wasn't just economic, it was a moral obscenity, and it created rage. The British government was run by an elite that went to the same schools, belonged to the same clubs, protected each other. The civil service was bloated and inefficient. Positions were handed out based on connections, not competence. In the colonies, British administrators were corrupt and brutal. They ruled by force. When locals protested, the response was violence. The Amritsar massacre in 1919. British soldiers opened fire on unarmed protesters in India. 309 killed, over 1,000 wounded. The system existed to serve the elite and maintain control, nothing else. World War II broke Britain financially. The war cost everything. Britain borrowed billions from the United States. The debt was crushing. By 1945, Britain was bankrupt. The pound was weak. The country couldn't afford its empire anymore. Maintaining troops across the world, administering colonies, it was too expensive. And the United States, the new superpower, wasn't interested in propping up the British Empire. America pushed for decolonization. The financial leverage was clear. Britain had no choice. At home, the British people were exhausted. They'd just survived 6 years of war. Rationing continued into the 1950s. Cities were bombed out, and they looked around and asked, why are we spending money on colonies when we can't feed ourselves? In the colonies, the independence movements were gaining mass support. Gandhi in India, Nkrumah in Ghana. These weren't fringe groups, these were organized mass movements demanding freedom, and the British military couldn't stop them. You can't occupy a country when the entire population wants you gone. 1947, India, the crown jewel of the empire, gained independence. Britain simply couldn't afford to hold it anymore. 1956, the Suez Crisis. Britain and France tried to take back the Suez Canal from Egypt. The United States forced them to back down. It was humiliating. It announced to the world that Britain was no longer a superpower. After that, the empire collapsed in waves. Kenya, Malaysia, Uganda, one by one. By 1965, the British Empire was effectively over, 20 years. From global dominance to irrelevance, the elite never saw it coming. They thought the empire was too big to fail. They thought the colonies would never rise. They thought the pound would always be strong. They were wrong. Now let's jump to the Soviet Union. 1985. The USSR is a nuclear superpower, one of two poles in a bipolar world. It controls Eastern Europe, has alliances across Asia, Africa, Latin America. The Red Army has millions of soldiers. The KGB is the most feared intelligence agency on Earth. Moscow looks invincible. The Communist Party has ruled for 70 years. The system seems permanent. 6 years later, it's gone. Let's walk the stages. The Soviet Union rose from the ashes of World War II. It defeated Nazi Germany. It industrialized faster than any nation in history. In 1957, it launched Sputnik, the first satellite. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. The Soviet model looked like it might actually work. Central planning, 5-year plans, state control of everything. And by the 1970s, the USSR had achieved nuclear parity with the United States. This was power. This was a rival to American hegemony. But beneath the propaganda, the inequality was extreme. The Communist Party elite, the nomenclatura, lived in luxury, special stores, dachas in the countryside, access to Western goods. Meanwhile, ordinary Soviets stood in line for bread. Housing was cramped. Consumer goods were scarce. The promise was equality. The reality was that some were far more equal than others. The Soviet system was rotten to its core. The party controlled everything: jobs, housing, travel, speech. There was no accountability. Officials were appointed, not elected, and they were incompetent. The bureaucracy was massive and inefficient. Nothing got done without bribes. Corruption was everywhere. And dissent was crushed. The gulags, political prisoners. The KGB made sure no one questioned the system. By the 1980s, the Soviet economy was collapsing. Central planning doesn't work. It never did. But the cracks were showing. The Soviet Union was spending 20 to 25% of GDP on the military. The arms race with the United States was bankrupting the country. The war in Afghanistan was bleeding resources and lives. Oil prices, which had propped up the Soviet economy in the 1970s, collapsed in the 1980s. Revenue dried up, the shelves were empty, the system was out of money. By 1985, no one believed in communism anymore, not even the party elite. It was a zombie ideology kept alive by force and inertia. Mikhail Gorbachev came to power and tried to reform. Glasnost, openness, perestroika, restructuring. He thought he could save the system by liberalizing it. Instead, he destroyed it. Because once you let people speak freely, once you admit the system is broken, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. In Eastern Europe, the satellite states started demanding independence. Poland, Hungary, East Germany. The Soviet military didn't intervene. They couldn't afford to. November 9th, 1989. The Berlin Wall fell. The symbol of Soviet power in Europe just came down. And Moscow did nothing. August 1991. Hardliners in the Communist Party attempted a coup to stop Gorbachev's reforms. It failed. Boris Yeltsin stood on a tank and rallied the people against the coup plotters. December 25th, 1991. Gorbachev resigned. The Soviet Union officially dissolved. 74 years of communist rule ended not with a war, but with a whimper. The Soviet elite thought the system was unshakable. They thought the people would never rise. They thought the empire would last. They were wrong. Let's go back further. Rome, the eternal city, an empire that lasted 1,000 years. But even Rome followed the pattern. Stage 1. Explosive rise. Rome conquered the Mediterranean. Legions that couldn't be beaten. Infrastructure, law, culture that defined civilization. Stage 2. Extreme wealth. Inequality. By the late empire, senators owned vast estates worked by slaves, while ordinary Romans depended on grain doles. Stage 3. Political rot. The Senate was corrupt. Emperors were assassinated. Praetorian guards sold the throne to the highest bidder. Stage 4. Financial strain. Debasement of currency. Inflation. The military cost more than the empire could afford. Stage 5. Loss of faith. Barbarians weren't feared anymore. They were hired as mercenaries. Roman citizens didn't believe in Rome. Stage 6. Shock events. 410 AD, Visigoths sacked Rome. 476 AD, the last emperor was deposed. The Western Roman Empire ended, or Spain. In 1580, Spain ruled half the world. The Spanish Empire controlled South America, Mexico, the Philippines. Gold and silver poured in from the New World, but the same pattern played out. Wealth concentrated in the monarchy. Political corruption and religious inquisition. Financial collapse from endless wars. Loss of faith as colonies revolted. By 1898, after defeat in the Spanish American War, the empire was over. Different centuries, different ideologies, the same 6 stages every time. Let's step back and name what we're seeing. This isn't theory, this is history repeating with mechanical precision. Every empire begins with a period of extraordinary growth, military conquest, economic expansion, technological innovation. They dominate their era. Britain, the Soviet Union, Rome, Spain. At their peak, they look unstoppable. Success breeds inequality. The elite, the people who control the system, accumulate vast wealth. They live in luxury. The gap between them and everyone else grows enormous, and they lose touch with reality. Power corrupts. The institutions that built the empire become self-serving. Bureaucracies bloat. Corruption spreads. The government exists to serve the elite, not the people. Accountability disappears. Empires overextend. Military spending, maintaining dominance, it costs more than the economy can sustain. Debt accumulates. The currency weakens. The fiscal crisis becomes undeniable. When people lose faith that the system serves them, the social contract breaks. They stop believing in government, courts, elections. Polarization intensifies. Extremes gain support the center cannot hold. Finally, external shocks, wars, financial crises, uprisings, they expose the weakness. The empire that looked stable collapses suddenly. And everyone asks, how did this happen? But the signs were there all along. 6 stages. Over and over. Britain took 20 years to fall when stage 4 hit. The Soviet Union took 6 years. Rome took longer, but the pattern held. The speed varies. The stages don't. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. The United States, the current global superpower. The country that everyone assumes is too big, too rich, too stable to ever follow the pattern. Let's be very clear. America has already triggered stage 4, and the symptoms are everywhere. America's rise was extraordinary. After World War II, the United States emerged as the uncontested superpower, half the world's GDP, nuclear weapons. The Marshall Plan rebuilt Europe. The dollar became the global reserve currency. America won the Cold War. The Soviet Union collapsed, and the 1990s were the unipolar moment. American culture, American technology, American military power dominated the planet. Silicon Valley, Hollywood, Wall Street. The American model looked like the end of history. Stage 1 is complete. The rise happened. The dominance was real. Now we're in the rot. In 1980, the top 1% in America controlled 8% of wealth. Today, it's 32%. Higher than France before the revolution, higher than any time in American history. The top 0.1%, about 130,000 households, own more wealth than the bottom 90%. That's more than 117 million households. And the elite aren't just rich, they're obscenely, visibly rich. Private jets, mega yachts, buying social media companies for $44 billion, launching cars into space while millions of Americans can't afford healthcare. The gap between billionaires and everyone else is larger than any point in history, larger than the Gilded Age, larger than the 1920s. Meanwhile, the middle class is being destroyed. Housing is unaffordable, a generation drowning in student debt, healthcare costs bankrupting families, wages stagnant for 40 years while asset prices explode. This is stage 2, the wealth inequality, the elite excess, the gap between the top and everyone else so extreme that resentment builds into rage. Check, complete. Trust in Congress is at 15%. 15. That's not dysfunction. That's a legitimacy crisis. The Supreme Court has become politicized. Half the country believes the court is illegitimate depending on which way it rules. Insider trading by members of Congress is rampant. They trade stocks based on classified briefings while their constituents struggle. Lobbyists write the legislation. Corporations own the politicians. Both parties are funded by the same donors. Both parties serve the elite. The differences are theater. The outcomes are the same. Nothing fundamental changes because the system isn't designed to change. The bureaucracy is massive, unaccountable. Agencies operate with no oversight. The Pentagon can't pass an audit. Trillions in spending no one can track. When people look at Washington, they don't see a government that serves them. They see corruption, incompetence, a system rigged for the powerful. Stage 3, political rot, complete. Here's where it gets critical. The United States is now deep in stage 4, and the numbers are catastrophic. The national debt is $36 trillion. The deficit is over $2 trillion per year. The United States is borrowing 6% of GDP annually just to function. Entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, they're unfunded. The numbers don't work. The obligations exceed the revenue by tens of trillions. And the military? America spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. Bases in 80 countries, endless wars in the Middle East that cost trillions and accomplish nothing. The dollar is still the reserve currency, but for how long? China and Russia are moving away from the dollar. BRICS nations are exploring alternatives. The petrodollar system, the foundation of American financial dominance, is weakening, and debt service costs are exploding. The interest payments on the national debt now exceed the entire defense budget. The United States is borrowing money just to pay interest on the money it already borrowed. This is stage 4, the financial strain, the debt, the unsustainable spending, the currency under pressure. Britain hit this stage after World War II. They were bankrupt within years. The Soviet Union hit this in the 1980s. 6 years later, gone. America is here now. Stage 4, triggered. And now the acceleration begins. Trust in media is at all-time lows. No one believes anything anymore. Everyone thinks everyone else is lying. Trust in elections is shattered. Half the country believes the 2020 election was stolen. The other half believes January 6th was a coup attempt. Neither side trusts the process. Trust in police has collapsed. Trust in public health collapsed during COVID. Trust in universities is collapsing as they become ideological battlegrounds. The institutions that hold a country together, media, elections, courts, police, schools, people don't believe in them anymore. And the political polarization is total. Left and right don't just disagree, they hate each other. They view each other as existential threats, as enemies, not opponents. Moderates are being pushed out. The extremes are gaining support. On the left, socialism, wealth redistribution, eat the rich rhetoric. On the right, authoritarianism, strongman politics, extra legal measures. Both sides increasingly believe the system is broken beyond reform, that it needs to be torn down. This is stage 5 forming. The loss of faith, the internal conflict, the center collapsing. We're not fully there yet, but we're close. Closer than most people realize. Stage 6 hasn't happened yet, but the kindling is dry. All it takes is a spark. What could it be? A contested election that both sides refuse to accept. An economic crash that wipes out savings, a political assassination, a large-scale terrorist attack, a war that goes badly, a pandemic worse than COVID. Any of these could be the shock event that pushes America from stage 5 into stage 6. And history says once you're in stage 4 and 5, stage 6 comes fast. Britain took 20 years from stage 4 to total collapse of the empire. The Soviet Union took 6 years. Rome took longer, but it followed the same trajectory. The pattern doesn't care about exceptionalism. It doesn't care that America invented the internet or put men on the moon or won World War II. The pattern is mathematical, inevitable. Every empire thought they were different. Every empire thought the pattern didn't apply to them. They were all wrong. The math says we're next. Let's be very clear about what we're saying here. The United States has completed stage 1, 2, and 3. Explosive rise, complete. Extreme wealth inequality, complete. Political rot and corruption, complete. The United States is now deep in stage 4. Financial strain, debt, currency pressure. The numbers are catastrophic and getting worse. Stage 5 is forming. Loss of faith in institutions, political polarization, extremes gaining support. The pattern says stage 6, the shock events and accelerated collapse, comes next. And when stage 4 and 5 are in place, stage 6 can happen suddenly, within years. Now, can America avoid this? Can the system reform itself before the collapse? History says no. Empires don't reform from within once they reach stage 4. The elite won't give up their wealth and power voluntarily. The institutions are too captured. The incentives are too broken. France tried to reform in 1789. The nobility refused. Revolution followed. The Soviet Union tried to reform with Gorbachev. It accelerated the collapse. Britain never tried to reform. They just managed the decline. The pattern is clear. Once stage 4 is triggered, the trajectory is set. Some of you watching this don't want to believe it. You'll say America is different. We're too democratic, too wealthy, too advanced. That can't happen here. That's what they said in Britain, in the Soviet Union, in Rome, in Spain. Empires never see it coming because the people at the top, the elite, they're insulated. They live in a different world. They don't feel the strain. They don't see the rage building. They think they're safe. And by the time they realize they're wrong, it's too late. How fast can it happen? Here's what should terrify you. The final stages happen fast. The Soviet Union in 1985 looked stable. The Communist Party had ruled for 70 years. The system seemed permanent. 6 years later, it was over. Britain in 1945 controlled a quarter of the world. 20 years later, the empire was gone. Collapse doesn't take generations, it takes years, sometimes less. And the shock events, the triggers for stage six, they're unpredictable, but they're inevitable. Because when a system is fragile, when stage 4 and 5 are in place, eventually something breaks. An election both sides refuse to accept, a financial crisis that spirals out of control, a war that goes wrong, a domestic attack that shatters the illusion of security. The specifics don't matter. What matters is that when the system is fragile, the shocks will come. And when they do, the collapse accelerates. That's stage six, and the pattern says it's coming. The question isn't if, it's how and when. So let's end with the uncomfortable truth. The pattern is clear. 6 stages. Every empire, Britain, the Soviet Union, Rome, Spain, all followed the same sequence. The United States has completed stages 1, 2, and 3. The rise, the inequality, the rot. The United States is deep in stage 4. The debt, the financial strain, the unsustainable spending. Stage 5 is forming. The loss of faith, the polarization, the collapse of the center. Stage 6 is pending. The shock events, the accelerated collapse. The math doesn't care about American exceptionalism. The pattern doesn't care about our history or our ideals. It's mechanical, predictable, and it's already in motion. Can anything change this trajectory? Can reform happen before collapse? History says no. But history also isn't destiny. The future is unwritten. Maybe America will be the first empire to see the pattern and break it. But that requires acknowledging where we are, stage 4, and that requires the elite to give up power voluntarily, to reform a system that benefits them. Does that seem likely? The pattern says no. The pattern says we follow the script to the end, and the end for every empire before us was collapse. The question isn't if, the question is how fast and what comes after. If this opened your eyes to where America actually is in the cycle, you need to keep watching, because when stage 5 fully forms, when the revolutionary movements gain mass support on both extremes, you'll want to understand what's happening and why. The answers aren't hiding in the future, they're written in the past, and the script is playing out right now. Subscribe, stay informed, and watch the pattern unfold, because history says we're next.